let's start the topic. Today's topic is liberalization, privatization, and globalization. The short form of liberalization, privatization, and globalization is LPG. Right. In the first phase, we are going to understand the concept of the LPG. Then we are going to understand what are the impact of LPG, liberalization, globalization, and privatization in Indian economy. So when we adopt a policy, right? When we adopt a policy, we have two outcomes. One is a demerit, and other one is your the positive side and the negative side. So we will discuss both. So the economy of India has undergone significant policy shift in the beginning of 1990s. The new model of economic reforms is commonly known as LPG, liberalization, privatization, and globalization. So before going the LPG concept, let's understand why India adopted this mechanism, the mechanism of LPG, like liberalization, globalization, and privatization. To understand this concept, we have to go in the history, right? We have to see the economic condition of 1991, right? So क्या हुआ, what was happening? Suppose आप देखते हो the Pakistan economy today. What is the situation, whatever situation the Pakistan economy is facing these days, the same situation was prevailing in Indian economy, right? In 1991, ठीक है, when the Narasimha Rao government take the charge, right? When Narasimha Singh take the oath of the Prime Minister of India in 1991, then India economy was under the grip of crisis. It was a Indian economy was under the grip of the crisis, where we have to face the devaluation in currency. ठीक है, devaluation in currency was there. The there were the financial deficit. The deficit is increasing, right? The deficit is increasing, and the foreign reserve was depleting at a sharp rate, right? So this was the alarming situation. इसमें क्या हुआ? The situation was very very bad, because what is happening? The private players or the foreign investors, they are losing hope. They are losing hope or trust in Indian पॉलिसीज. इंडियन इंडस्ट्रियल पॉलिसी में क्या हो रहा था? उनका विश्वास कम हो रहा था. देन व्हाट वाज हैपन? द अल्टीमेटली क्या हुआ? अल्टीमेटली द आउटकम ऑफ दिस इकोनॉमिक क्राइसिस, नौबत यहाँ तक आ गई, राइट? नौबत यहाँ तक आ गई कि इंडिया को क्या करना पड़ा? अपना जो रिजर्व होता है, द रिजर्व ऑफ द गोल्ड, राइट? एज यू नो दैट हमारे यहाँ करेंसी कैसे छपती है, हाउ द करेंसी इज द करेंसी का कैसे हम लोग इशू करते हैं, हाउ द इंडियन गवर्नमेंट इज गोइंग टू इशू द करेंसी, इंडियन करेंसी. इट कैन द इंडियन गवर्नमेंट कैन इशू द करेंसी ओनली इन दैट प्रोपोर्शन. उस प्रोपोर्शन में वो करेंसी इशू कर सकती है जितना कि उसके पास गोल्ड रिजर्व होता है. द गोल्ड रिजर्व विच इज केप्ट विद द आरबीआई, राइट? रिजर्व बैंक ऑफ इंडिया के पास जो गोल्ड रिजर्व रखा जाता है, राइट? उसके उतना जितना गोल्ड रिजर्व होता है उतना ही वो करेंसी क्या कह सकती है, उसको वो इशू कर सकती है, राइट? इन द इकोनॉमी. सो व्हाट वाज द आउटकम ऑफ द इकोनॉमिक क्राइसिस? इंडिया का जो फॉरेन रिजर्व इतनी जल्दी खत्म हो गया 1991 में. ये तो क्या हुआ कि इंडिया को अपना गोल्ड मॉर्गेज करने की नौबत आ गई. सो to overcome that situation, what was decided? It is decided to take the debt, to take the loan from the World Bank, right? Fortunately, the World Bank accepted India के रिक्वेस्ट को, लोन रिक्वेस्ट को वर्ल्ड बैंक ने एक्सेप्ट कर लिया. बट देयर वाज अ कंडीशन इज इम्पोज्ड ऑन इंडियन इकोनॉमी, राइट? व्हाई द कंडीशन इज इम्पोज्ड? बिकॉज द वर्ल्ड बैंक हैव टू गेट इट्स फंड बैक. सो हाउ द फंड्स कैन बी गेट बैक? It can be get back only when there is a capital formation in the economy. जब capital formation होगा इंडियन इकोनॉमी में, then only the World Bank can get its debt back or its loan back. So तो क्या हुआ उस टाइम? It was imposed that the loan was given by the World Bank to India on the conditions that the India will have to open its economy, right? It will have to adopt the mechanism of globalization and privatization. तो क्या हुआ, the in new economic policy, the new economic policy which was launched in 24 July 1991, all these mechanism, all the LPG elements was introduced, right? It is introduced in order to develop the economy at a faster rate. So it was a dark phase, the phases. If you see the phases of Indian economy, then we have the first phase, second phase, and the third phase. If you come to the third phase, that is from 1991 onwards. So from 1991 onward, the actual growth of industries took place in India, right? So the phase of 1991 was a dark phase in the Indian economy. Because why it is a dark phase? Indian economy was in deep crisis in July 1991, when the foreign currency reserve had plummeted to almost 1 billion. Inflation had rose to an annual rate of 17%, right? So hamara, if you see, that the inflation rate kitna high ho gaya, that is more than 17%. Physical deficit was very high and has become unsustainable. Foreign investor and NRIs lost their confidence in Indian economy. जो हमारे foreign investors थे और NRIs थे, they have lost their faith. Why they have lost their faith? Because they were they were scared that if they will invest, if our investment is done by these foreign investor and NRIs in India, it it may be, as the situation is prevailing, it may they may lose their funds. उनको क्या होगा, their capital which is introduced, which is invested in the business, it will lost, because there is a very the Indian economy that is stuck in the grip of the economic crisis, right? So capital was flying out of the country and were close to the defaulting on the loans. So what was the situation? As a result, the NRIs or foreign investors ने क्या किया? They start withdrawing their money from the Indian market. उन्होंने जब ये मनी अपनी अपनी विड्रॉ करनी शुरू करी इंडियन मार्केट से, देन द डिफॉल्टिंग सिचुएशन वाज टू प्लेस इन इंडिया. तो इंडिया को क्या हुआ, अपने लोन रीपेमेंट में प्रॉब्लम होने लगा. द सर्कुलर फ्लो ऑफ द money was stuck, right? So although with these bottlenecks at home, many unforeseeable changes swept the economies of the nation in the West and European, so Southeast Asia, Latin Americans, and as well around the same time, there was the economic compulsion at home and abroad that called for a complete overhauling of our economic policies and programs. Major measures initiated at a part of liberalization globalization strategy in the early 90s, including the follow, right? So due to this condition, when the in to overcome the situation of the economic crisis, the Indian government was forced to adopt the mechanism of liberalization, privatization, and globalization. Let's see what is the meaning of the liberalization. Liberalization, as you all of you know, liberalization, what is liberalization? It means that you are making your policies very liberal. You are making your policies the investor friendly, right? Liberalization refers to the relaxation of government restriction in areas of economic policies. Thus, when a government liberates trade, it means it has removed the tariffs, subsidies, and other restrictions on the flow of goods and services between the country. Liberalization means we are adopting our liberal policies in which through which we are reducing the tariffs, subsidies, right? Custom duties में amendments करना है, custom duties को कम कर देना, right? Custom duties को कम कर देना, right? Making changes in the tariff policies and making them liberal and investor friendly, so that the smooth flow of goods and services can take place between one country to another country. So what is happening by adopting the liberalization? What was happened? The Indian economy, it's open its door for rest of the world, right? When the doors is open for the rest of the world, then there was a there was a smooth flow of goods and services between the countries. How it is possible? It is possible by making the policies, tariff policies, subsidies, and restrictions on flow of goods by the government liberal, right? Then we will go to, after liberalization, I will come up to the privatization, right? Privatization. Okay, privatization. Students, can you hear me? Okay, what is privatization? Privatization means disinvestment, right? When you initiated the economic policy of 1991, it initiated, it promoted the disinvestment in the PSUs. ठीक है, वो कंपनीज the गवर्नमेंट के कंट्रोल में थी, right? Disinvestment was introduced. Disinvestment से क्या होगा? What was the merit of the disinvestment? That the disinvestment process, it give the ownership in the hand of the private entrepreneurs. ठीक है, when the ownership or the management came in the hands of the private entrepreneurs, then what was happening? Then the industrial sickness was improved. Ultimately, those government units, those government PSUs which were turning into loss units, they converted into profit making units. It refers, so let's see the definition of the privatization. It refers to the transfer of assets or services functions from public to private ownership, right? So what is privatization? Privatization means the transfer of assets or services functions from public to private ownership. When you transfer some shares of the PSUs, right? The PSUs companies, like the big PSUs, in the hands of the private ownership, it means that the privatization, it means the disinvestment process which started from 1991 onwards in India. Privatization can be achieved in many ways, right? Franchising, leasing, contracting, etc. Capital market should be sufficiently developed to be able to absorb the disinvestment of the public sector shares. Now, what is happening due to introduction of the privatization? A disinvestment process started taking place in different PSUs. So those PSUs which were not making any profits, which were incurring losses, so the ownership, the some shares are open for the some shares are floated in the market, and the private entrepreneurs are invited to purchase their shares. Ultimately, what happened? When these shares were purchased by the private entrepreneurs, then the management came in the hand of the private entrepreneurs, and the private entrepreneurs, they have introduced their skills, and these 6 units is turned into profit making units, right? Then I will come to the globalization, right? Then globalization, as you know, globalization means exchange of know-how. When you are connected, when you are connected with the rest of the world, with the other countries of the world, to exchange your goods and services, to exchange your ideas, to exchange the innovations or technology with rest countries of the world, that is known as globalization, right? Globalization, you see that the world is turning into a global village, right? No economy in the present can afford to live in isolation, because when you live in isolation, then what is happening? You will not have a exchange of ideas, exchange of technologies. When you don't have any exchange of technology, then what is happening? Then the innovative activities, they will not take place in your economy. So these innovations are very, very crucial in order to adopt the latest techniques in productions, in providing services, right? So economic globalization is increasing the economic interdependence of a national economies across the world through a rapid increase in cross-border movements of goods and services, technology, and capital. Globalization means there is a free movement of goods and services, technology, and capital with different nations of the world. It is a process which draw countries out of their insulations and making them joint rest of the world, and it is march onwards a new world of economic order, right? Current globalization trend can be largely accounted for the development of economic integration, which less developed economies by means of foreign direct investment, right? What happened when globalization was introduced? When globalization was introduced in the new economic policy, then the Indian government was able to gain the trust of the foreign investors, the private players, right? Ultimately, there is a circular flow of capital formation in India economy, and gradually India came out with the grips of the economic crisis of 1991, right? Let's see. Then I will come to the liberalization. So let's understand the concept of the LPG. So we have already understand why the LPG, why the liberalization, privatization, and globalization in the Indian economies was introduced. It is introduced to overcome the situation of the economic crisis of 1991. The economy of India has undergone significant policy shift in the beginning of the 1990s. The new model of economic reforms is commonly known as the LPG, right? When the India adopted the new model of economic reforms, right? We have different economic reforms. From time to time, government announced different economic reforms, right? So the model which was adopted by India in 1991 under the under the under the chairmanship of Narsima Rao, right? It is known as the LPG. It means that liberalization, privatization, and globalization. Then reason for implementing the LPG, right? Why the LPG? Why the liberalization, privatization, and globalization was introduced in Indian economy? Number one is large and growing physical imbalances. Fiscal imbalances, gross fiscal deficit rose to 12.1% of GDP in 1991. So what was happening in 1991? That the fiscal deficit was keeps on increasing from year to year. So it crossed 12.5% of GDP in 1991. Then growing inefficiency in use of resources. So what is happening when India was a closed door economy? Then inefficiency in different sector was growing. Why it is growing? Because India is not able to take the benefits of the latest innovations which is taking place in different parts of the world. Low foreign exchange reserve, right? So what was happening? The another reason of implementing LPG was the inefficiency, low foreign exchange rate, right? Low foreign exchange rate means our balance of payment is decreasing day by day. So what is the balance of payment? The balance of payment is your difference between imports and export. You import some goods and you export some goods also, right? Goods and services. So when you import goods, so you will have to pay the foreign currency. When you export goods, it means India is getting the foreign currency, right? It is getting the foreign currency. So the difference of the two is known as the balance of payment. So what is happening when there is a negative balance of payment? When there is a negative balance of payment, then what is happening? There is a devaluation in the currency. Then there is a devaluation in Indian rupee. It means that Indian rupee is becoming weaker and weaker, right? With the rest currencies of the world, right? With the dollars, with euros, with pounds, right? It's becoming weaker. So when Indian rupees will become weaker, then we will have to pay more dollars for importing crude oil. So to overcome this situation, the LPG mechanism was introduced in Indian economy in 1991. Then high inflation rate, right? See the high inflation rate. The inflation rate that crossed 13.87% in 1991, the inflation rate was very, very high. So it crossed the 13.8.7%. It means that the necessary product, right? The necessary product, rice, wheat, all the all the product, food grains, it is becoming very costly in the market. Why? Because the inflation rate is growing at a very high rate in 1990. When there is a inflation rate growing in the economy, then what is happening? The starvation can take place in the economy. How starvation can take place? Because people don't have, if you see the general masses of the Indian economy, most of the people do not have very high purchasing power. When these commodities, when daily needs, the commodities which are used in day to day life, they will become very expensive, then the common man will not able to purchase them. So ultimately, what will happen? Then the starvation will take place in the economy. The low annual growth rate Indian economy, right? The annual growth of the Indian economy is very low. It is also low, and also it is stagnated, right? The growth of Indian economy was reached at a saturation point, right? So the low annual growth of rate of Indian economy stagnated around 3.5% from 1950s to 1980s. So the growth of Indian economy was recorded 3.5% from 1950s to 1980s, which is very low, while the per capita income is 1.3%. Also, the per capita income is very low, right? It is only. So we have discussed liberalization. So liberalization refers to relax the government restriction in area of economy. Thus, when the government liberalizes trade, it means it has removed the tariffs, subsidies, and other restrictions on the flow of goods and services between countries. Then, the fruits of liberalization reached their peaks in 2007. So, when India adopted liberalization, right, in 1990, so the benefits of liberalizations were reached to its peaks. It reached to the peaks in the year 207, when India recorded highest GDP rate of 9%, right? So it is the highest GDP rate which India gained in 2007, which India became the second fast growing major economy in the world, right? India came under second position in fastest growing major economy in the world, next to China, right? The growth rate has slowed significantly in the first half of 2012. An OECD report states that the average growth rate was 7.5%, 7%, which double in decade, and reforms would speed up the pace. So it is the need of ours, so that we can double our GDP rate, right? Then privatization. Privatization refers to the transfer of assets or services, functions from public to private ownerships, or control and opening of the closed areas of private sectors. Private sector can be achieved in many ways: franchising, leasing, contracting, etc. Capital markets should be sufficiently developed to able to absorb the disinvestment in public sector shares. So when we talk of the privatization, then comes the we should also discuss the disinvestment, right? What is the disinvestment? When privatizations, we are studying the privatization, it's it's equally important to understand the concept of the disinvestment also. So disinvestment can also be defined as the action of an organization selling or liquidating an assets or subsidiary. The government appointed a committee under the chairmanship of C. Rangarajan to study and recommend privatization more effective. The committee submitted its report in 1993, which suggested the sectors where the privatization was needed. Also suggested the government to set up an autonomous body to monitor the disinvestment. So when a committee was formed, a disinvestment committee was formed under the chairmanship of C. Rangarajan. It submitted its report to the government, and it's pointed out those sectors where the need of disinvestment was required, right? So the Disinvestment Commission, the 5 members of the Disinvestment Commission was set up on August 7, 1996. Major tasks of the committees are, so the Disinvestment Committee, what they have suggested, let's see that, to prepare long-term in disinvestment program. So the first task of the Disinvestment Commission was to prepare a long-term disinvestment program to determine extent of disinvestment in PSUs, right? So to determine those PSUs, those SIC units which are under the control of the government, to point out, right, those industries, right, to decide an instrument pricing and time to supervise sales process, also to supervise the sales processes and other objectives of the disinvestment commissions. As on 31st October 2030, the 50 central public enterprises CPSEs listed on the stock exchange contributed about 15% of total market capitalization, right? The successful of privatization in India. So before discussing these topics, let's see what are the advantages and disadvantages of the privatization, right? When you adopt some policy, right? When you introduce some policy, when you introduce, right? One adopted privatization, we have some advantages also, we have some disadvantages also. Let's discuss them. First we are going to throw First I am going to throw light on the advantages of the privatization. Let's see. Number one advantage of privatization is privatization may help in reviving sick units, reviving the 6 units which have become a liability on the government. So one of the greatest advantage of the privatization was to in pointing out the sick units which are run by the state and the central government, they are pointed out, right? So what is happening? These private sick units were liability on the government, because every time when they are incurring in regular losses, so the government will have to give them a bailout package. So when giving a bailout package at regular interval of time, then it is reducing, it is ultimately increasing the gap in deficit financing, right? The financial deficit is increasing in Indian government. So what was the best way that to point out these sick units and to sell their some shares to the private entrepreneurs. So when the shares are sold to the private entrepreneurs, then what happened? The management was taken in the hands of the private entrepreneurs, and the private entrepreneurs, they will do the necessary they will do the necessary work. They will remove the problems or the grievances, and ultimately these sick units, they can be turned into a profit making units, right? So which again will be a good sign, which again is a good sign for the development of the economic development of the country. It help in the profit making public sector units to modernize and diversify their business. So another advantages of privatization was to modernize the PSUs, right, and to diversify their business. So what is happening in the by introducing the privatization in Indian economy, the PSUs which are not able to take the advantage of modernization, they will take the advantage of modernization. Why? Because by doing the disinvestment, what is happening? More funds will be brought in by the private players, and these funds can be utilized in taking the in converting the units into modern units, and to diversify their business. Suppose a PSU is doing a business, certain business in a petrochemicals, then it can be diversified. The business can also be diversified in other areas also, right? The other areas, that may be the insurance sector, that may be a that is a banking sector. So to diversify the business, and to modernize the PSUs is another big advantage of the privatization. it helped in making the public sector units more competitive. So a healthy competition was introduced in the economy, and it helped in making the public sector units more competitive. Without government financial backing, capital market and international market process public sector to be efficient. So by doing the privatization, these PSUs will become the self-sufficient units. It means that they will be able they will be able to meet their all the liabilities which they will have to fulfill while doing their business. They will convert into self-sustaining units. It reduces the political influence and decision making on the managers. So it also privatization, one of the greatest advantages of the privatization, that these PSUs are free to take their decision related with their management. Because what was happening when there was the PSUs were under the control of the government, they will the decisions of these PSUs, they are affected by the political influences, right? It reduces the political influences on decision making of the managers. So the PSUs, the privatization is also important. It's played a very crucial role in taking the decision it take by the PSUs. Now the PSUs were given the free hands by introducing the privatization. They were given the free hands to take their decision related with their management, right? So now let's throw a light on the disadvantages of the privatization, right? The number first disadvantages of the privatization was privatization encourages monopoly, power in the hands of big business houses, and thus greater disparity of income and wealth. So another disadvantages, right? The another disadvantages of the privatization is the concentration of power in certain hands, right? Concentration of wealth in certain hands and disparities in income, right? So the privatization initiated that the power of wealth was in certain hand, because the business houses, the private players, they were interested. They were only interested to maximize their profits, and they are ignoring the social work or the social welfare of their employees, right? So this is the greatest disadvantage of the privatization. Then we have privatization may result in loop-sided development of the industry in the country, right? Then the limited resource of the private individuals cannot meet some of the vital tasks which alter the very character of the economy, right? The limited resources of the private individuals cannot meet some of the vital tasks which alter the very characters of the economy. The private sector may not uphold the principle of social justice and public welfare. So another disadvantages of the privatization is that the privatization initiated, it's completely ignored the social justice and the public interest. Why? Because the private entrepreneurs, they are interested to fulfill their personal interest also. They are least concerned, or they are least bothered about the social welfare, right? The social welfare, all of you know that the what is the social welfare. Social welfare is giving fair wages, giving incentives to the workers, providing medical facilities, health insurance. So these private private so the privatization completely ignored the principle of social justice and public welfare. Then I will come to the I will come to the discussion whether privatization is successful or not in India. Then the So the Lagan Jute Machinery Company. Let's discuss the case of the Lagan Jute Company Limited, right? The gross turnover pre-privatization, जो pre-privatization में इसका turnover था 6 million था, right? 6 million was the pre-privatization. April June 2017. Post privatization, it reached up to 24 million July September 2000. So it is a positive sign. Then we have Modern Food Industry Limited, right? The Modern Food industries share value were went up to 2138 on 30 December prior to sales, rupees 3247 on 25th February post sales. So what was the, so it is again a positive signs, right? So it is against a good sign of the privatization. The modern food industries में क्या था? Modern food industry में share value कितनी थी? rupees 2138 on 30 December. It is prior to sales when disinvestment was not there. इसका जो शेयर वैल्यू था ये था ₹2138 शेयर मार्केट में. Then when after the privatization or disinvestment, the share price was increased. It is increased from 2138 to 3247 in 5th April after post sales. Then Paradeep Phosphate Limited, so net profit pre sales. Paradeep Phosphate Limited, ठीक है. Paradeep Phosphate Limited क्या है? Paradeep Phosphate Limited is against a PSU, right? Paradeep Phosphate Limited is again a PSU, which is uh, which was under the direct control of the government before pre-liberalization, right? Pre-liberalization में it was under the control of the government. So उस situation में जब ये when it is run by the government, then what is happening? The net profit pre-sales से पहले net profit कितने थे? Minus 57.95 crores, right? There is a loss in this company. Post sale के बाद after initiating the post sales, right? After initiating the post sale, after doing the initiating the disinvestment, it is turned into a profit making unit, right? So rupees 23.796 crore. तो इसकी sales कितनी हो गई? After disinvestment, its sales went to rupees 23.79 crores. Then we have Bharat Aluminium, Balco. Balco is another PSU, right? Then we had Hotel Corporation of India, HCI. Then Hindustan Zinc Limited, right? It is also a PSU. So if we analyze the data, analyze the data of analyze the data of these PSUs before privatization and after privatization, then we will see that the benefits are of the benefits of the privatization. The benefits of the privatization is more than its demerit. So it is concluded. So we can come under the conclusions that the privatization or the disinvestment process is good for the Indian economy. Why it is good for the Indian economy? Because number one is those sick units which was under the control of the government, they turned into a profit making units, right? So against what was happening, the sales is after disinvestment process, the number, if we analyze the data, then we can see also the share prices of these PSUs, the share prices of these PSUs capital market, they are increasing. When the share prices are increasing in the market, it means that it is a good sign. It is a good sign of the working of the performance of the company. So it means the company is performing very good, right? Then again we can see that the sales or the sales of turnover is also increasing by introducing the disinvestment process. What is happening? The sales is also increasing. It means that it is also a good sign. When your turnover will increase, it means that it is also contributing to your profits. Ultimately, when your sales will be increased, ultimately your profits will be increased, right? So we can sum up, we can conclude, we can come under the conclusions that the introduction of privatization in Indian economy as per the new economic reforms or as per the new industrial policy of 1991 is a good sign, right? So students, can you hear me? Students, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Students, okay, students, today's lecture is over, right? I have another class at 10:05,
Okay, sir.
right? So I am concluding here, and we can meet tomorrow, right? If you have any confusion, right? If you have any confusion, you can get back to me, right?
Of
Right?
course. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Okay,
sir.
thank you.
Okay,
Okay,
sir. Okay.
what I'm doing, I will upload the notes. I will upload the notes in Teams shortly. Please go through the notes, right?
Okay, sir.
Okay,
Okay,
sir.
thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.